All right, welcome back to the Picture This podcast. I was drawn to today's guest because of her passion for promoting literacy and fostering a love of reading in children. She's an accomplished author known for unbelievably engaging books with a focus on themes of diversity and empowerment. Her works, such as a personal favorite, Imani's Moon, New York Times bestseller, Why Not You, and the brand new On Our Way, What a Day, celebrate individuality and encouraging young readers to embrace their uniqueness. Welcome to Picture This, JaNay Brown-Wood.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. One of the things that I noticed when I first went to your website, you have a really, really cool quote right there for everybody to see. The learning happens best when it is part of an active process of knowledge building. And it's a longer quote. And please go to JaNay's website, which you'll find below, to see the rest of the quote and all of her other wonderful things. But I just think that quote is such a great concept and a great place for us to start today.
Yeah.
So when you think about how to make a young reader part of that active process, especially since you were a little bit of a reluctant reader yourself, how do you encourage that knowledge building with your stories and with your school visits?
I think in many different ways, but often it starts with centering on the child, centering on children, and knowing where they are, knowing where they're coming from, and using that as sort of a jumping off point to pull them into the story. So what I mean by that is that's one of the reasons why I like to write diverse books, because there's a lack of diversity in children's books anyway. But I want young readers of all backgrounds to be able to find themselves in my books and then want to pick them up and engage and read them over and over again with, adults in their lives that they love. So trying to make sure that my books reflect diversity and children across the board, but also knowing that children are active learners. They learn with their bodies. They learn by listening and repeating and trying to do things. So a lot of the language that I try to incorporate into my books, I try to make it active. Like my book, Jam 2, it's written in rhyme, but it's also onomatopoeic. And so there are sound words all through the book. And when I'm reading that book, I actually utilize call and response. So I'll read the text, and then I'll read a part of the onomatopoeia, and then I'll point to the kids, the crowd, for them to repeat back what I said. And then I do it again, and then they repeat it back. And we do that all throughout the book. So not only are they listening, not only are they learning new names of percussion instruments that they may not have ever heard of, but they're also paying attention to what I say, watching my body so that they can engage and repeat back to me. So those are just some ways that I try to engage learners in multiple ways so that they want to be a part of the book reading experience.
I love that harkens back to the call and response of historical storytelling. You try to incorporate those kind of things, like the historical storytelling aspects in your work. I know it's there. I'm just wondering how conscious you are of it.
Sometimes I'm very conscious of it. Like in Imani's Moon, there's the whole oral storytelling tradition as Mama tells Imani these different stories to sort of uplift her. And then, spoiler alert, then Imani does the same thing back to Mama at the end of the story. So I remember, Adam, when that book first came out, and I was in Fresno. I'm from Fresno. And I was doing a book release party. And I was reading the way I do, because I have sort of a theatrical background, a performative background. So I read it very engagingly. And I remember the bookseller looks at me and she says, "You're a griot." And I was like, "Griot? Tell me more." I was unfamiliar with this term. She's like, "You're a griot, a storyteller." And ever since she said that, I kind of wear that on my heart, like, yeah, I am a griot. So sometimes, like I said, I put it in there deliberately, the way I have oral storytelling in Imani's Moon. But other times I just think about, like, how can I engage my listeners? How can I engage my readers? And then that just comes naturally when I'm on stage and I'm sharing books with kids.
I'm so happy you brought up Imani's Moon. And I mentioned this to you before. It's a book that I really connected with. It came out right around the time that my first book came out. And at the time, we were going through some things in my family, and my mother-in-law had Alzheimer's. And that story represented kind of a really good connection where I could show things to at the time, he was 5 going on 6, I think, when that came out. So we could talk about kind of ways to communicate with his grandmother through picture books. And that's whenever something happens in my family, I go, is there a picture book for this? And if there's not a picture book for that, I go and try to write the picture book for that, right?
Yes.
So thank you for that story. And I'm wondering if you've seen any ways that educators have connected that story in ways that you haven't thought about, kind of like I did there.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for sharing that with me. And that really, I mean, as an author, hearing stories like that, that just warms your heart. You don't always get to see the impact of your work out in the world. So then when someone shares an anecdote like that, I just thank you for sharing that with me. I really appreciate that. And as far as educators using my work, I am always in awe of educators. I know I'm an educator myself, but like librarians and educators, I just am like, these are some of the best people to walk the earth. And I've seen different ways that my books are used, particularly Imani's Moon. I think it might have been a class I was focusing on computers. And I remember I got these emails with videos that children had made that had Maasai warriors, and they were jumping. Like they did some kind of coding that allowed for the Maasai warriors to jump. And I was just like, wow. I mean, I would have never even thought of something like that to incorporate because, picture books, one of the powerful aspects of them is that they can cut across curriculum. They don't have to just be English language arts. You can do computers, you can do math, you can do science, and center on a picture book to help solidify some of those concepts. So to see that was one that was so surprising, so refreshing. And then again, I was just so impressed by the creativity of the educator.
Yeah, I love when people connect STEM to our stories because unless we're writing nonfiction or really a STEM-based story, as authors, we sometimes don't think about that. And I know I've done school visits where there have been, for instance, robot chickens. So I have a series of books with a chicken and a pig, and they made robot chickens and pigs, and they would drive them around together on adventures, and they made mazes and things. They had to like combat these things and go over these obstacles. And so the educators took characters that the kids were attached to or that they had to learn as part of the curriculum and did something unique and fun with it. What are some other like wow moments you've had where you've been like, this is really cool? Or when you finished a book and you couldn't wait to bring it to a school visit because it had some extra thing that you wanted to express?
Yeah, well, I want to start answering that with like this idea of intentionality. I feel like I bring this word up a lot across the spaces where I work as an educator, all of these things, intentionality. And I think that's really what educators need to bring when they're looking at picture books. So looking deeper at them, not just at the surface level, but saying, what else can I do that's outside of the box with this picture book, but that also, like I said, weaves together other curricular areas. And then how can I do this in an intentional way that can still go along with learning objectives and all of these other things that I know that they have to make sure they're doing. Allowing for that creativity and sort of open-mindedness around that, I think, is a good starting point to really take your engagement with picture books to the next level. And so I think for me, as far as like I think you asked about other ways educators have used my books. Well, there's something I want to share that I'm excited about that I'm eager to see.
Secret stuff.
Yeah, eager to see what this looks like. So Adam, as you know, so many of my books really are for younger readers, like preschool and early elementary. I have some that are for sort of older elementary, like Imani's Moon or Mahogany. And then I have the Love Puppies chapter books. But I have a new book coming out that I wrote in collaboration with the Cayman Science Center, and it's called Scientists Like Me. And the audience is really, I would say, 5th grade and on. And it's a combination of biographies written about like scientists across disciplines. It talks about what brought them into science, what they were doing as young kids, challenges they overcame, and a discussion about what kind of science they do. And then on top of that, there are a bunch of questions that I weaved into the book where kids can ask themselves as they're sort of determining, well, what are their interests in STEM or in science? And then there are hands-on science activities that they can do at home. So I'm really eager to see, once this book gets into the hands of educators, like, what are they going to do with it? Because I can picture so many dynamic ways that a book like that can be used to really help kids get so excited about, or even more excited about, science, and then have some concrete things that they can do now to further support their own scientific development.
And it's so important to realize that kids can get into these things at an early age.
Yes.
And we almost discount STEM as I'm sure educators don't, but as a parent, I certainly didn't try to focus my kids on that the same way that I did on outside activities like sports or, those kind of, they didn't do Boy Scouts, but like I did Boy Scouts. So those kind of activities always had a little more gravitas for me than sitting down and coding at a computer or things like that. But when you start to see some of these things and just the cool science that is happening right now and how important it's going to be for us to set up our kids and our kids with the tools to be able to do that kind of stuff in the future, whether it's, science, math, computers, whatever it is, authors, it's awesome to see that you're considering that and you're laying the groundwork that hopefully other people will follow.
Yeah. And what was so cool too is that for the majority of the the scientists that are still alive in the book, I got to actually interview them and talk to them and ask them these questions. And so many of them were like, the kids should reach out. We love to hear from kids. We want to talk to the kids. So this idea that kids can do this stuff now, they can start exploring these areas now. They can start looking into things like volunteering over the summer. You can already be doing those things. And I think reminding adults that, they can, and then challenging adults to start looking for some of those resources in their communities that they can then pass on to these kids so that they can hit the ground running when it comes to scientific exploration.
What do you have in your library that helps feed your energy when you sit down to write or when you're trying to be creative?
Let's see. That's tough because I love books. I love books. I am the author who, and I did this before I was published, I do this now, that I walk into Barnes & Noble or independent bookstore, and I just pull picture books off the shelf, and I take a stack, and I like pop a squat somewhere, crisscross applesauce, and I just read them, and I look at them critically, and I think about them, and I think, how would I have done that? Or, ooh, I like this. Or, I don't know if that worked for me. And being critical when I'm looking at books that are published, ones that I think that are great, ones that maybe I don't like as much, and all in between, they often are informative. It's instructive for me to remind me of sort of the things that I like to do in books, or maybe give me an idea of, maybe I can try something else like that. So I think just being around books is something that gives me inspiration and gets me excited about reading. But something that I've been thinking about a lot are fractured fairy tales. And, because they're fun and they're interesting. And I've been writing some myself. Like I have one that's published called Mahogany. It's a Little Red Riding Hood tale. And my next one coming out is called Acacia. I'm not sure the pub date for that yet, but that's a Rapunzel tale. But I've been thinking about fractured fairy tales so much because I think about when I was growing up, I didn't see myself in fairy tales or Little Red Riding Hood or anything like that. So to be able to write them now in sort of a quirky, contemporary way is so much fun. But then it opens the door, I think, for some really rich conversations in classrooms that educators can have with children. So say you take my book Mahogany, and then you take some of the other fractured fairy tales, like I think of Little Roja Riding Hood, or a book like Ninja Red Riding Hood by Corey Rosen Schwartz and Dan Santat, right? There's so many other ones. So then an educator can take a stack of these different fractured fairy tales that are, based on a traditional one, and then share the traditional one, and then share these others, and have kids compare and contrast. Have kids talk about, like, what are some things that were similar? Well, what are some things that were different? Have them rate which ones did you like the most, why? And then have kids think about their own cultures and then write their own version of Little Red Riding Hood, but featuring their own backgrounds. So that's something that I think inspires me, is picking up some of these fun fractured fairy tales and kind of seeing where they go.
I'm a big fan of fractured fairy tales, or even reimagining stories. I'm actually working on one right now where I took a very popular book that's, it's been made into movies several times. It's a difficult read. It is.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, but I'm going to cut this out. So it's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. So what I did was I took this book that is difficult to read, and I'm reimagining it in a modern way where it's not as difficult to get through. It's not as difficult to understand, but the journey is the same.
Yeah.
So the character goes on this arc and has these experiences and comes through at the end with a better understanding of who they are personally.
Wow.
Which again, when you're thinking about fractured fairy tales and these kind of things, at the core of it, there's a narrative arc. And if we take that little bit and give that to a group of kids or a group of students and say, here's the arc. It doesn't matter what your character is. It can be a human, it can be an animal, it can be, I like to talk about Spoon, like the Amy Krauss Rosenthal book Spoon, which is illustrated by my friend Scott Magoon. So it doesn't matter what your character is. You take it on this same path, but you get to see, what character do you want? Who do you want to be? Right? Mm-hmm. Do you want to be a motorcycle, or do you want to be somebody that looks like you? And you can do that, which the creative arts is the only time that you get to do that.
Yeah. And it's so fun. And it encourages creativity and still that critical thinking. And then, we started off this conversation of talking about, like, starting where kids are and helping them find themselves to then pull them in. What better way than to have, a kid write themselves into Little Red Riding Hood and determine how they're going to deal with the wolf, right? So, yeah, I think fractured fairy tales are a fun way to do that.
How does that change for you, your choice of books, when you go into a teaching environment?
It depends on my environment. So if I'm doing school visits, generally I'm focusing on my own books, because I like to kind of talk about my journey as an author and the challenges I've overcome and that kind of thing. So I'll generally use my own books when I'm doing school visits. However, when I'm in the educator space, right? So I'm a former college professor, and I used to utilize picture books in my classroom with adult learners. I think that's another dynamic aspect of picture books. You really can use it across ages, right? So often people think picture books are just for kids. Wrong. You can be just as, again, going back to intentionality, you can be just as effective using a picture book in a college classroom to help cement some concepts. So anyway, I remember that I would use different picture books to bring across concepts tied to child development concepts or early childhood education. So some of my go-tos for a while was something like Bear Snores On. If I was illustrating something like dialogic reading, right, interactive reading. And so I would model it for my students. And then I remember there was this activity I would do. I would come in with like this huge stack of books, and I would model interactive reading. We would talk about what this is, what is dialogic reading, what sort of things can you do? And then I would break I would separate my students into small groups and then give them books and give them an opportunity to go through the books and like start marking up how they could read it interactively. And then they would read it with each other. And so this, I just felt like was always such an important lesson, because if you haven't seen an interactive read of a book, you kind of have sort of a narrow-minded way of how to have a book read, right? Like you just read the words, you show the page, you turn, you read the words, you show the page. Versus interactive reading, you have intonation in your voice. You change up the speed that you're delivering. You might have questions that you ask that are tied to the kids or tied to the illustrations, or ask kids to make predictions. So using picture books then to help model a way to reading in an engaging way is something that I loved doing with my adult readers or my adult learners.
Yeah, my first book was an interactive book. Excuse me. So, warning, do not open this book. You open the book and you have to like turn the pages. It's you let the monkeys out, and it's like, so I don't read the book. I tell the story of, interacting with the book more than reading the text on the book. So it becomes an interplay with the audience. And
Absolutely.
because I did that with my first book, it has grown. I've done it with the others. And I love hearing that was a key part of what you were working on in the classroom, was understanding that there is text on the page, there is an image on the page, but the book doesn't stop there. It's a tactile thing. It's an experiential thing. And specifically, picture books are meant to be shared. The concept of a picture book isn't really you sit down by yourself and read a picture book. It's typically you and someone else, or you and a group of other people. Typically kids, but I'm sure you could read it to a group of adults as well. But that interplay becomes part of what you're doing with the book that is really important in the classroom.
And not just that, when you have these group experiences with books and kids are enjoying the book and the teacher's having fun and they're enjoying the book, you're really building this positive association around literacy. Like these experiences where you think back like, man, I loved reading that with my teacher, or I loved sitting on dad's lap and reading that story. And so that positive association with literacy is important to help then kids build literacy skills later. So the way that you deliver the reading really matters. And, there's actually different research that shows benefits across domains, physical and social emotional and language and cognitive, all of these different domains that are supported by interactive reading. It's more than just read the text, flip the page. You can just do so much that engages readers and takes your reading to the next level.
So do you have a go-to prompt or lesson or thing that you use when you're trying to spark that student engagement?
Well, so this is actually something I want to share with you. It's not a go-to that I use, but it's a go-to that I created. And so this is called, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is called Jammies with JaNay. And so it is
this.
Oh, okay, yeah. It's a website that I started. And really the purpose of it was to have a spot where parents or educators can go, get some resources, get a video where I do a story start. So this interactive reading, and then I turn it over to the educator or the parent to finish the reading. And I created these resources, including questions that the adult can ask children tied to the book, vocabulary words that I pulled from the book, because there's often kids will be like, what does that word mean? Well, I've done the work for you. It's there. You tell them what it means and have a conversation around it. And so I have a handful of different books that I have these story starts, and it models interactive reading. And again, shows adults that there are other ways that you can read books that are very engaging. So that's something that I'd like to share. I made it. I'm biased. I like it. And it's I think a tool that's useful for those who want to sort of take their bedtime reading routine or maybe their circle time reading routine to the next level.
Can you share a short behind the scenes story about one of your books, maybe one of the new ones? or maybe one of the experiences you had, with one of the scientists or the one that comes out soon, where we can give them kind of a peek into what it's like to be an author a little bit?
So there's a story I like to share about Grandma's tiny house, and it gives you sort of a glimpse into the relationship between the author and the editor and the illustrator. And often people don't realize that the author and the illustrator are generally kept separate. At least in my experience, we're kept separate. The editor gives the author a contract for the words, and then the illustrator goes and does their thing, and they have their contract for the images. And while you get to see phases of the illustration process, so like for me, generally, I'll get to see sketches first, and then I can offer feedback to my editor about them. Then I'll get to see the next phase of sketches that are a little bit more detailed. Then I'll get to see colored versions, and then the final product. And then I can offer feedback. Now, I want to bring up Grandma's Tiny House, because this is actually my second book, and it came out in 2017. But the Spanish translation just came out in March of 2025. And this was a really interesting experience because this book is based on my family's Thanksgiving tradition. So my dad at one point had 13 living siblings, and some of those siblings had kids, and some of them had kids. And we would all pile into Grandma's house for Thanksgiving. And it was a potluck. And so we would bring this tasty food into Grandma's house to celebrate. And so this book is like near and dear to my heart. So when I was looking at the illustrations, and I think, this is my Thanksgiving, this is what I think of, I noticed that there were bees that were included in the illustration. And I remember I had reached out to my editor, which I adore my editor through Charles Bridge. Her name is Julie Bliven. She's the best. And I was like, Julie, I noticed that there are bees on the cover and throughout. I don't know how I feel about those bees, Julie. And so I'm kind of like giving her my rationales behind, like, I don't think of bees and Thanksgiving. I don't know. And so we kind of had a back and forth. And that's what's really great about Julie. Like, we can have these really candid conversations and be honest with each other. And so ultimately she was like, we're going to keep the bees, JaNay. I was like, okay, all right, fine. After learning about the bees, what I found out is the illustrator, Priscilla Burris, she hid pictures of bees on all of the outdoor spreads. Like, I don't know if you're going to be able to see. Here is a bee on the outdoor spread.
Okay.
So what it does is allows for another level of engagement when reading this book with kids, because I can read the spread and say, okay, can you find the bee? Where's the bee? And now you've got these kids who are like looking critically, at a spread of the illustrations, and then are so excited when they find the bee. So I was really glad by the end of this that Julie said, JaNay, we're keeping the bees, because I just felt like having that fun additional thing that kids can do with the books makes the book all the better.
It's so cool when they hide little things. A lot of my illustrator friends do that, and sometimes it's from book to book. They hide pieces of other books in their new books and string those along. I have a book called Books Big Adventure, where my illustrator put our books in the bookcase for the child, which I thought was really cool. I'm like, oh my God, those are our books. So it's so cool when you find those. Imagine when a kid makes the connection and they get that little bit of juice. So thank you for sharing that.
I did just think of another one for my newest book. So my newest book that came out, or one of them that came out in 2025, is On Our Way, What a Day. And it's illustrated by Tamisha Anthony. And I actually found out through Tamisha's Instagram that one of the children that she illustrated in the book, it's Phil here, right, is actually her little brother at a young age. So she has a picture of her little brother. He's wearing the same outfit. He looks exactly like Phil. And I actually can't remember if maybe his name is Phil too. And I just thought, here I am, an author who's trying to help kids be able to find themselves on the pages of books. And here's an illustrator who literally put the young version of her brother in a book. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. Just felt like, I don't know, like validation and being seen by the illustrator. And you have to check out On Our Way What a Day. Her artwork all the way through, and the incorporation of music and like jazz and blues. It's so cool. But I really loved that she shared that story about adding her own brother into the book.
I love that when things like that happen. I've had illustrator add their pets. Speaking of pets, yeah, Foster wants to be in every podcast. I'm going to let him outside real quick, and then we'll finish up.
Yeah, sounds good.
So the last thing I wanted to hit, and a conversation with you would be completely worthless if we didn't talk a little bit about diverse and impactful picture books. I want to better understand how, as authors, we can encourage more diversity in writing. So, for instance, I present as a white male, and I've had people come to me and say, maybe you can't write this story. But if that story doesn't exist, how do we get it written? How do I help fill in the gaps without crossing the lines?
First and foremost, I'd say write the story that's in your heart. Write that story. Write it as authentically as you can. However, that means you're going to need to do some additional due diligence. If you are outside of that community that, say, your protagonist belongs to me, that means that's extra work you're going to need to do. That's extra research that you're going to need to do. That's extra looking for individuals from that community to maybe vet your work and read it. That also includes some reflection and really looking at your work critically to make sure that there aren't biases that are incorporated into your story because it's from your perspective and you're not actually from that community. I think it also sometimes, and this is hard to say, it also might mean that you aren't the best person to tell that story. And that is something that is true sometimes. But there are also other ways, I think. For example, you brought up an illustrator who is from the community, but might it make sense to reach out to another author from that community and you co-write it and you guys write it together? So I think that I'm not going to say don't write that story that has a diverse character. I'm going to say write the one that's in your heart, but be ready to put in on the extra work to make sure it's authentic. But also know in the back of your head that this book might not come to fruition because you might not be the best one to tell that story.
How do we encourage the curating of these diverse and impactful picture book collections for the classroom so that there are books around in the collection for every student in the school?
Things like We Need Diverse Books, which is an organization. I believe that they have on their website actual lists of books featuring African-American characters, books featuring Jewish characters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So jumping on those lists and kind of looking to see what's included there. I would also say having conversations with librarians. They are savvy people and they kind of have their fingers on the pulse of, what's being published. So talking to them and sharing hey, I noticed that I'm missing picture books about individuals with disabilities. Do you have some recommendations? I think having those conversations with librarians are a great idea. I would also say, look at the makeup of your classroom. Start there, but you can do larger school too. But look at the makeup of your classroom, and then look at the books that are within your curriculum and within your library right now, and ask yourself honestly, are my books reflective of my demographic? And if it's not, that's a starting point. Say you have predominantly African-American students, but you only have one book that features a Black character. Well, that doesn't necessarily match. So that's a starting point to be all right, I do need more African-American books. Let me go to my librarian and talk to them. Or let me visit the We Need Diverse Books website and see what they have there. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast today. You've been out there banging the drum on what I'm just starting to do now, which is trying to create those resources for educators, trying to make them very easy for them to find and use.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you so much for being a part of this.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation and for the engaging conversation. And I hope that your readers feel like they got some nuggets that they can utilize in their educational spaces and to help support the learners and children within their community.
So everybody take a minute, like, share, comment, stop by and check out JaNay's Jammies website and her main website. All that information will be below. And if you have questions or you want to put somebody up to be on the podcast, please reach out.
Yeah, and feel free to follow me on social media as well. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook, JaNayBrown-Wood.com.